Let me pray, then we'll get started. Lord, thank you for this day and for your word and for your church, for this community. We love you. We don't deserve the gifts we have from you, and yet you give them. So help us just to trust you in that and to lean into what you have for us, to be that prodigal that comes back and trust the Father will be kind and generous, and we thank you for that. And I pray that you speak through me. I want to be available for what you have to say, so I just pray that you would use this time. In your holy name, amen. Well, if you haven't been here, we're working through the Sermon on the Mount, and as I've said before, it's always intimidating to try to explain better what Jesus said, the greatest teacher of all, and the greatest sermon of all. Let me clear that up for you, right? That's hard. And then Jesus being who he is, one of the funny misconceptions about Christianity and the Bible is that it's out of touch with life, right? It is not. The Bible is not a PG or G book by any stretch. It deals with hard things. Jesus came to teach us how to worship, but also how to live. And a lot of it, the Bible is really about this. And today we're going to get to one of those hard topics. Last week we talked about anger. Today we're talking about adultery, lust, and sex. So if you want to take off, now's your time. I will tell you up front, this kind of stuff is not comfortable for me to talk about. I'm pretty modest when it comes to this kind of thing. I don't like anything like that, especially in a co-ed environment. I just get down, my eyes get down. And so one of the challenges for me in this community is we have so many medical people that just will talk about anything. Looking at you, Annie. And so we were at their house the other day, and she asked a question, and Trevor's like, Annie, it's like, no, I would not talk to any other woman your age about this, but here we go, because it's just, that's been a hard adjustment for me. I don't like sexual humor. Not because I'm so pure. Mostly I think it's lazy. There's no art to it. I just don't like it. So this is a hard subject for me. But Jesus talked about it, and he talked about things that are important for us to know, right? He wasn't wasting his words, and the gospel writers didn't record everything. We know that. And so if Matthew recorded this, it probably was pretty important to Jesus for us to know and to discuss and to live by. So we're going to talk about it and then never talk about it again. All right, let me read this passage, Matthew 5:27-30. You have heard what it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body go into hell. So Jesus doesn't mince words, right? Some of his stuff is kind of hard to understand. Some of it isn't. This is pretty clear, right? This is a big deal to Jesus, and so we need to take it seriously. He's going through, to some degree, he's kind of working his way through the commandments, and he's gone from the 6th to the 7th commandment. The commandments are kind of divided in half. The 10 commandments are kind of divided in half. The first half, roughly, depending on how they're divided. There's some variables there, but the first half roughly is about our relationship with God. The second half is roughly about our relationship with each other. Both are important. As I've said before, one of the things that was radically different and new about Judaism, following Yahweh, was that he cared about these relationships. He had some ethical expectations for us, and he still does. It isn't just about have you given the right offerings, but have you lived well? Have you lived with your fellow humans well? And one of the things that can be confusing in Scripture is what we call progressive revelation. That God reveals himself and then reveals himself a little bit more and reveals himself a little bit more, and most fully in Jesus. And Jesus says, if you want to know the Father, know me. And the epitome of Jesus' life is his death on the cross. If you want to know the Father, he's like that. Right? He's like Jesus. But it's this progressive revelation. And so sometimes it can be hard to interpret Scripture because we'll read laws in the Old Testament that feel like, that doesn't feel great. That was a massive step forward. And he's continually moving society forward. So I may have said this last week. We see that polygamy is allowed in the Old Testament, not allowed in the New Testament, but the Old Testament is full of polygamy not working. Like, this is a cultural norm. We'll tolerate it for now, But let's just be honest, it doesn't work. Nobody wins in this situation. This is not the best thing for you. So God is tolerating that as he's moving it forward. The story begins with Abraham, whose theology was terrible, and yet God uses him to begin this journey. He was essentially a pagan that's like, okay, I'll follow this God. And then God leads him and then begins to evolve. So there's progressive revelation. So sometimes when we see things that feel inconsistent, let's look at the story throughout Scripture. Take some time to get familiar with that, but we see that happening. Jesus is expanding on this commandment. This is from Exodus 20:14, you shall not commit adultery. So he's going to expand on that. Remember, Jesus said he came to fulfill the law. We saw this a couple weeks ago in Matthew 5:17, so earlier in the Sermon on the Mount. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. Which I think one way of looking at that, like, what does that even mean? I didn't come to abolish it, but fulfill it. But you're clearly saying different things. Even his statement, you have heard it said, he's given the Sermon on a mountain, and he's teaching the law. Now, rabbis would say things like, you have heard it said, and kind of what it meant was, let me explain this to you now in this current context. Let me clear this up for you. Jesus is clearly putting himself in a position of authority. Let me tell you what we really meant. So we said you should not commit adultery. That's pretty easy to gauge, like did I or didn't I, right? That's pretty simple. Let me tell you what we really meant. You have heard it said that. I'm going to expand on that. So he's putting his words above and beyond the Ten Commandments. This is the part of this progressive revelation. Does that make sense? So we said that. That was the bare minimum. Now let's expand on that. Adultery speaks specifically of the sin of sexual relations with a partner other than your spouse. Here, Jesus is expanding this. He's taking it further. What did I really mean? Again, in this first part of this passage, you have heard it said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. This has been a tough kind of passage for a lot of us for centuries. What does he mean? And the Puritans got a hold of Christianity and like sucked all the fun out of it, right? And so it's like the best way to be a Christian is have no fun. If you're sad and miserable, then you're nailing it. I don't really get that picture from Jesus, right? I grew up, when I became a Christian, there was lots of really bad Christian bookstore art. Lots of us bought it. But there were these paintings of Jesus laughing, right? And he looked like he was from California, and and people loved it. There's no photograph of that happening, but I believe it happened, right? God is creator, and when we look at creation, we see some of who he is revealed in us and what we see around us. We're given to play and to love and to move and to laugh. So did Jesus laugh? I think so. Christian life is not supposed to be unfun. This passage is not about finding people attractive. That's entirely natural. You're going to, of course, find people attractive. This is not condemning sex or sexual desire. These are God-given parts of life. But everything has its proper place in its proper way. When we read this passage, we see things like lustful intent. Jesus is talking about intentionality. This is specifically a man attempting to lure a woman into sex outside of marriage. That's specifically what he's talking about. The sin isn't just sex outside of marriage, though. The sin begins before that when we try to make it happen. So it isn't just did you or did you not commit adultery, but were you working in that direction? Were you heading in that direction? Were you steering the conversations, the looks, the whatever, the moments, the secret moments you might have with someone towards an adulterous interaction? One of the professors we had in Bible college, Jim Allen, would talk about this, and he would use this phrase. He was kind of talking about this. Like, people don't just like, what? I just had committed adultery. Where'd that happen? Like, how'd that happen? It's like, he would say, you build a climate to fall. Like, we kind of take steps towards it, right? I don't like the slippery slope argument for why some things are bad or good. I think that's can be iffy logically or philosophically, but it's usually this slide into something, right? And Jesus is talking about that. Are we steering a relationship towards sex outside of marriage, some sort of violation of this standard? For the Israelites, violations of the commandment were easy enough to determine, like I said. But Jesus is addressing the heart. As graceful as Jesus is, this is more difficult. See, our tendency is to ask where the line is and see how close can I get to it, and maybe just tip my toe across, right? That's who we are. And so sometimes when I'm talking to young people and they're asking, like, what's appropriate, well, maybe it could be any number of issues. Specifically, what's appropriate sexually? I usually respond with, if you're asking, probably don't do that. Definitely in the moment. If you're in the moment, like, should we do this or not? No. Back off from that, and then let's talk about it when your heart rate is calmed down, you know. So, but our tendency as humans is, how far can I get to the line? Very few of us, the speed limit might be, we debate about this all the time, the speed limit might be 55. Most of us drive between 58 and 62 or more, right? Because we know we're probably not going to get pulled over, right? We're not. If you cause an accident going 60, you might get ticketed for speeding. Generally speaking, we know that's where the line is, right? And that's our tendency. It's our human nature is to do that. Jesus is calling that out, right? Don't ask where the line is and see how close you can get it. You're already heading in the wrong direction. You're already moving away from God in your heart. He's addressing the heart of the matter. If we're asking how much we can get away with, we've already lost the plot of our relationships with each other and with Jesus. The thing is, when things are misused, the real purpose and the real enjoyment is lost. Sin doesn't satisfy. It's certainly fun for a while, but it doesn't satisfy. And it leads to more misuse. It leads to more problems, to more sin, to more damaged relationships. This isn't just about sex. This is kind of how things work. If you guys know Lizzie Call or Lizzie Eggers, I called her to confirm this. She's studying nutrition in a grad program at the University of Minnesota, so she's smarter than I am. So I called and just kind of asked her this. One thing about nutrition and how our bodies work is we're designed with a system of craving, and it gives us clues about what our body needs. Right? If you're craving potato chips, it's not just because, and this is I'm talking about sex and food. So this is like all the things not to do as a preacher. If you're craving potato chips, it's not just because they're delicious. It might be because you need sodium. And we crave a tasty version of that. So I just want some chips or something that's salty. It may be your body saying, I need some sodium. That's a nutrient I need right now. If you're craving chocolate, you might need magnesium. Who said that? Yeah. It might be that your body needs magnesium. Right? Unfortunately, we tend to crave the least beneficial format of the nutrient that we crave or that we need. It's part of our human nature. We taste what tastes good, whatever. But it isn't bad in and of itself. It is our body talking to us. And doing long challenges like I did on Monday, you kind of become very in tune with what you need because you're so depleted. This is a natural thing. It's a system built into us. One reason why we tend to overeat is we're eating food that has less nutrition in it. And so our body recognizes that it doesn't have, in the food that you've provided, it doesn't have the nutrients it needs. So it has to eat more. You have to eat more chips to get beyond sodium the other kinds of nutrients your body needs. So we eat more and more junk food as the body is looking for the nutrients it needs. Does that make sense? It's just kind of what we do. And that, of course, makes us feel worse. And then we eat more comfort food. And just kind of this negative spiral. I'm not saying, we ordered Five Guys last night. So I'm not saying don't eat junk food from time to time. And we didn't even burn the calories to go get it. We had it delivered. It's like, oh, I have to go all the way to the front steps. It's like, so I'm not saying you can't enjoy tasty food. I am saying that there's other things at work here, right? This is part of this God's revelation of how he works. These things that aren't nutritious kind of lead to more nutritional choices, right? It snowballs. One of my favorite authors, Frederick Buechner, says, "Lust is the craving for salt of a person who is dying of thirst." And then Rich Mullins wrote this: "Surrender don't come natural to me. I'd rather fight you for something I don't really want than to take what you give and I need." The fact is, we sometimes crave things that are bad for us, and we know that. It maybe satisfies in the moment. It's a quick fix. There are better sources of sodium than chips. Chips are delicious, but that might not be the best way to get it, etc. Better sources of protein or iron than Five Guys, but hard to resist from time to time. God has a best for us, but our tendency is to fight against that and take a cheap substitute. That is our tendency. I would have said to many of you, maybe I've said it from the pulpit, I think the easiest Christian doctrine to prove is the fall. We are fallen. We are broken people. And people, I don't like that. That makes me sad. Well, read a history book, or read the newspaper, or look out the window, or look in the mirror, and yeah, okay, this could be better. I could be better. We could be better. We tend to want things that aren't the best for us. Adultery is one of those things. The fact is that we are going to desire things that aren't good for us, that aren't right, and some things that are bad, some things that are even very bad. Another writer I have benefited from in the past, Donald Miller, was talking about some place in the world where atrocities were happening. There's pillaging and looting, and his friend says, "Well, do you think you could do something like that?" And Miller was stuck. It's like, if I say no, I'm saying I'm better than those people who are doing awful things. If I say yes, I'm admitting that I'm capable of some pretty bad things. Fact is, we all are, right? We're all capable of doing some bad things. We're fallen. We're capable of being attracted to or justifying evil and sin. We might say, well, this isn't as bad as adultery, and that might be true, but Jesus is saying, I have better for you than that. One of the problems we face in our culture is that humanism is the law of the land, right? You are valuable and right and good because you're human. I am a humanist. I'm a theocentric humanist. I think you're good and valuable because God says so. And our value comes from Him. Our sense of right and wrong comes from Him. But humanism, secular humanism, breeds narcissism. It puts me at the center of my world. So I can move from attraction to lustful intent and adultery, etc., with no hindrance, no worries, because I can do what I want or what feels good. So what do? Jesus makes it clear. We pluck out or cut off whatever is causing us problems. Let's finish the passage. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body go into hell. Eyes and hands typically play a pretty major role in sexual sin. But is Jesus speaking literally? No, I don't think so. It was common for Jesus, as any good Jewish rabbi, to speak hyperbolically. Sometimes hyperbole, satire, those kinds of things, sarcasm, they help us draw attention to something and look at it in a way like, okay, I get your point now. It jars us awake. It makes us see things. And Jews and Jesus use this often. This was a classic way to speak. He's not saying cut things off. Unfortunately, some people have done it. They've made themselves or they've maimed others in the name of obedience. The fact is, that doesn't fix the problem, right? Pluck out your eyes, you still have a mind. Cut off your hands, you still have eyes, you still have a mind. It doesn't fix the problem. Jesus' point is that we need to take our discipleship seriously. Remember, Matthew, one of his themes throughout this book is how to be a disciple of Jesus, how to follow him, how to live like him. Jesus' point here is that we need to take our discipleship seriously and take necessary steps to keep our natural passions from getting out of control. In the ancient world, the right hand and the right eye were considered more valuable than the left, because left-handed people don't have a soul. That's just well known. Kidding, they do. The implication is that the consequences of unabated sin are much worse than losing the use of your hands and eyes. So this affects this, and this affects this. Last week we talked about anger. Like if someone has something against you, if you let your anger get out of control, it's going to affect your worship. So go be reconciled. Reconciliation affects, or the lack of, affects our worship. This and this are connected. We need to take it seriously. It has serious consequences. One of the key problems with lust and sexual sin is it's about us, right? It's self-centered. Sex was given to be enjoyed by two people committed in marriage, but lust and sexual sin serve us. Jesus condemns sexual sin, but also selfishness. Our responsibility is to the other, to other people. This is radically countercultural. Under Roman rule, sex, pederasty, prostitution were commonplace. They were normal and acceptable. It was totally fine to have a boy as your sex slave. It was just normal. Prostitutes roamed the streets. When we read of prostitutes in the New Testament, they were likely naked, walking the streets. This was totally normal. Jesus is saying, that's bad. That's wrong. That isn't the best for you or for those people. We need to see them as people and to live that way. The result was the dehumanizing of people. But there's no place for any version of that in the kingdom of heaven. The places where God reigns and people live as he directs. And people were very important to Jesus, right? So people are to be very important to his followers. Jesus gave himself for people, so self-sacrifice is also normal to his followers. Jesus was tempted with all the things that we are tempted with, but he chose obedience. So obedience is part of being a disciple of Jesus. Now, what about women? Right? This passage is specifically male. The language is male. And to be fair, a lot of the Bible is translated in a very with a very male language. Sometimes you read, especially in the New Testament, it'll say brothers, and it could be brothers and sisters. But when you got a lot of dudes translating, sorry, ladies, dudes, we are what we are. So again, doctrine of the fall. So women kind of get sort of edited out sometimes in ways that don't fit maybe the original text. This passage is pretty male because women don't struggle with this stuff, right? So it's just natural. In Jewish and Roman culture, men were the power brokers in all things, exponentially more so than today and here. So I think Jesus is calling out the might makes right kind of ethic and societal norm. In other words, culture might tell you one thing, but I tell you another. Here's this traveling rabbi, a carpenter's son from a small, insignificant town, not just taking on Jewish culture, but taking on Rome. That's normal to you, but it's actually weird and wrong. That's not the best way to live. It's a pretty bold statement. So he's challenging men who kind of could do what they wanted. That's not the way to live. So yes, he is addressing contemporary power structures. But no, this isn't just about men. Jesus is not assuming or suggesting that women never let their thoughts go too far, that women never struggle with the lustful intent or commit adultery. He included women in his ministry, and he spoke to both genders together and separately depending on their situation. Sometimes just to women, sometimes just to men, sometimes to both. Women too are called to the full expectation of the law. So while the language in this passage is male, I don't think that means it's irrelevant to women. But what if I mess up? What if I mess up? Is this difficult? Is it difficult to have a pure heart towards everyone you see all the time? For some, it is. For some, like this isn't really a problem, but please don't talk about gossip or jealousy. Like that might be the struggle, or anger like last week. The Bible addresses all these things. Today we're talking about lust and adultery. What if I mess up? See, Jesus is close to the heavy-hearted, isn't he? He made that clear at the beginning of this message. Blessed are those who are downtrodden. Blessed are those who mourn. He's there. He's present with them. He wants what is best, but he knows it will be a struggle. He came and he cleared up some of the confusion on what a Godward life looks like, and then he gave his own life to break the power sin had over humanity. We sang this a moment ago. Now my debt is paid, it is paid in full, but by the precious blood that my Jesus spilled. Now the curse of sin has no hold on me. Whom the Son sets free, is free indeed. Our struggles don't have to win. That isn't the end of the story. It feels like, it was like, I tried so hard to beat whatever. But that isn't the end of the story. The fact is, Jesus bought that. He paid the difference. And he came to set us free. This side of heaven, we will struggle with some things. It could be anger, like we talked about last week. It could be lust, like we talked about this week, or it could be something else. Worship team, if you want to come up. So what do? We confess to Jesus what he already knows. We talked about spiritual disciplines in the spring, and one of those things is confession. We confess to Jesus. When we confess to someone like our spouse or an accountability partner, we may say, hey, I'm struggling with X. I need to unburden some of this. We find someone we trust. Not everyone can be trusted with everything that we have to share, for sure. But we unburden that. We share that with each other. We take steps to remove the temptation from our lives. If our old professor, Dr. Allen, is right that we build a climate to fall, then we build a climate to not fall. So maybe we change the standards of the media we consume. We change the people we spend time with. Or we change the topics we discuss and we joke about. We start building in a structure that helps us to succeed. I know the women's retreat is themed Abide, and the men are going to wrap up 1 John, I think, this week. So finally we'll be done with that. A couple of the themes in 1 John are, like, if you're going to sin, so don't lie about it. That's one theme. They say don't sin, but you're gonna, so don't lie about it. And then it's constantly abide in him. Well, that's interesting. So you who are gonna sin are welcome and you're invited to abide in Jesus, to take your security, your wholeness, your hope, your purpose from him. You don't have to be perfect. He came because you're not. He died because you're not. He taught all this stuff because we're not. And then he says, abide in me, you are imperfect. Come live with me, take your security with me, take your from me, your hope from me, all of that from me. abide in me despite all this and because of all this. And I will help reform you and remake you and reconcile you and rebuild you in my image. Is it going to be hard? Is it going to be difficult? Yeah. Most of us have a thing that we wish we could shake. It might not be this. We got a thing. It's just our version of fallenness. Is that great? Nope. Do we wish better for ourselves and our loved ones? Yep. But Jesus is faithful. We're going to sing Open Space. And it says things like, my heart is an open space for you to come and take your place. What I would encourage you to do, as I often do, is as we get ready to sing this song, you don't have to sing it all. It might just be a moment of prayer. Lord, you know what I need to give to you. You know what I need help with. He already knows. We confess that, and yes, we confess it again. Most of us have done it before. We confess it again. We invite him in again. We ask for wisdom and building the climate to succeed. Just invite him into those things that we don't like anyone to know about, right? He already knows. Let's invite him in so he can